My name is Jane, and before you judge me, please listen till the end. What I did broke a marriage, ruined lives, and I live with that guilt every single day. But if I've learned one thing, it's that sometimes people don't cheat because they stop loving. You cheat because you stop feeling loved. I had been married to Paul for 12 years. We were one of those couples who looked perfect from the outside. He had a good job as a construction manager. We owned a house in Chicago, no debts, no scandals. But inside our home, there was silence. It wasn't angry silence. It was the kind that creeps in slowly, the kind you only notice when it's too late. He would come home tired, eat dinner without saying much, scroll through his phone and go to bed. Our conversations were practical. Bills, work, groceries. Never feelings. Never us. I worked as a nurse, and every day I was surrounded by people who needed me. Patients crying, families breaking down, doctors shouting orders. My life at the hospital was loud, emotional, alive. But when I came home, it felt like stepping into a vacuum. Paul didn't do anything wrong, but he stopped seeing me. I became invisible in my own marriage. We had talked about having kids for years, but every time I brought it up, he said the same thing. Let's wait until things are more stable. That word, stable, became an excuse that stretched through time. 3 years ago, I secretly stopped taking my birth control pills. I thought if it just happened, maybe he'd finally be happy. Maybe it would bring us closer. But month after month, nothing. I started noticing strange pains, cramps that wouldn't go away. One afternoon, I went to my gynecologist. After some tests, she looked at me with that professional sadness doctors use when they have bad news. She said I had endometriosis. It wasn't impossible to get pregnant, but it would be very hard. I remember driving home in tears, rehearsing what I'd tell Paul. When I finally did, he barely looked up from his laptop. We can talk about it later, he said. He had a project deadline. That was the night something broke inside me. A few months later, I met William. He was a trauma nurse, new to our department, and had that calm, steady energy you crave in a hospital. At first, he was just another colleague. We'd grab coffee, talk about difficult patients, share jokes. But he listened. He really listened. I told him about my bad days, about how lonely marriage felt, and he didn't judge me. One evening, he mentioned his wife, Lisa, and his 2 kids. He said he wasn't unhappy, just tired. Always disappointing someone. Something about that honesty pulled me in. We were both tired people who spent our days saving others and came home to empty hearts. It started small, a smile that lasted too long, a hand that brushed mine at the coffee machine. Then one night, after a brutal double shift, he offered to drive me home. We sat in his car outside my house for almost an hour, talking about marriage, choices, dreams we'd given up on. When he looked at me, I felt seen for the first time in years. Then he kissed me. I should have stopped it. I should have walked away. But I didn't. That one kiss became a habit. Then a routine. Then a secret. We started meeting on weekends, pretending it was overtime. I told myself it was just an escape, that I still loved Paul, that I wasn't like those women. But every lie felt easier than facing the emptiness of my marriage. For a while, I actually believed I could live both lives. But guilt has a way of rotting the walls you build around it. One evening, I left my purse on the couch after work. Paul said he needed my phone to forward some renovation article I'd shown him earlier. I didn't think much of it. Later, though, I noticed he was unusually quiet, observing. His questions became subtle when my shifts ended, who I worked with, why I was late. He never accused me, but I felt the suspicion in every word. Then strange things started happening. My phone's location setting changed on its own. Once, I found my GPS turned off even though I never touched it. When I asked him, he smiled and said maybe he'd hit something accidentally. I ignored it. I shouldn't have. Meanwhile, William and I got closer. We'd joke about running away together, though neither of us really meant it, or so I thought. He started calling me his peace, his escape. It felt flattering at first. Dangerous later. One night, I was in his car behind the hospital. We'd just met after a long day. Suddenly, he winced, grabbing himself, his face twisting in pain. I panicked, asking what happened, but He could barely speak. His skin was burning, his eyes tearing up. I had no idea what was happening until I saw him.
Paul.
He was standing just a few feet away, calm, almost cold. He didn't shout or rage. He just looked at William and said, "It's just red pepper. Wash it with water. You'll be fine." My blood froze. Red pepper? My mind flashed back to that single condom in my purse weeks ago. I'd thought it was nothing. But he'd seen it. He'd known. Paul looked at me and said, "That condom was bought with my money, Jane. We have a joint account after all. Nobody asked you to share it." Then he turned and walked away. I tried to run after him, to explain, to say something, anything, but my voice wouldn't come out. William was in too much pain to move, and I just stood there trembling, realizing everything was over. That night, Paul didn't come home. The next day, he barely looked at me. He stayed silent, polite, detached. I begged him to talk. He said there was nothing to talk about. For the next week, he slept in the guest room. I barely slept at all. Then everything started collapsing at once. The hospital called me in. Someone had filed a complaint, an anonymous report about an inappropriate relationship affecting workplace professionalism. William got the same call. We were both placed under review. That evening, as I was leaving work, I saw Lisa, William's wife, standing near the entrance, shouting at him in front of everyone. The look she gave me when she realized who I was still haunts me. When I got home, the house was quiet. My heart sank the moment I saw the kitchen table. There was a note. "I know everything. The hotel, the lies, the fake sister trip. Don't look for me." Next to it was a USB drive. My hands were shaking as I plugged it into the laptop. A video started playing. Paul was sitting in our living room, calm, expressionless. "Jane, if you're watching this, it means you've come home to an empty house," he said. "I know about William. I know about the hotel charges on our account, about the overtime lies, and your fake story about visiting your sister. I know you were planning to leave once you had everything ready. So I'm saving you the trouble. I'm leaving first." I could hear my own heartbeat. He went on, "You'll find our joint account has been split. My half is gone. Yours is there, along with the bills you'll now have to pay alone. William's wife knows everything. The hospital administration does too. You made your choices, Jane. Now you get to live with them." The video ended. I sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face. The house felt smaller, emptier than ever. I realized I hadn't just lost my husband. I'd lost the version of myself that used to believe she was a good person. The next morning, I tried to call him. Blocked. I emailed him. No response. I drove to his office, but they said he'd resigned a week ago. It was as if he had erased his existence from my world. A few days later, I received the divorce papers in the mail. There was no message, just his signature. The reason listed: irreconcilable differences. The same phrase he used to avoid every real conversation in our marriage. The hospital put me and William on probation. Lisa filed for divorce and took the kids. William and I tried to hold on to each other, but guilt doesn't build a future. It only ruins the present. Every time I looked at him, I saw the destruction we'd caused. Within weeks, we stopped talking. I came home to an empty house each night, surrounded by silence that was louder than ever before. Every photo on the wall felt like evidence of a life I'd murdered with my own hands. And yet I knew deep down that Paul wasn't done. His silence felt too precise, too calculated. He had disappeared, but somehow I knew his revenge was still unfolding somewhere, waiting for me to feel its full weight. Because when you destroy someone who loved you once, you don't just lose them. You teach them exactly how to destroy you back. And Paul was a fast learner. When Paul left, I thought the worst part was over. I told myself he'd calm down. Maybe we'd talk again. Maybe he'd understand that what happened wasn't because I stopped loving him, but because I stopped feeling seen. But I was wrong. Paul didn't explode or shout like most men would. His silence was worse. His revenge was quiet, deliberate, and it didn't end the night he walked away. It had only just begun. A week after he left, the HR department at the hospital called me in for a meeting. I thought maybe it was about returning to work after the suspension. I walked into that small office with fake confidence, clutching my coffee cup like a shield. The HR director's face was blank but serious. "Jane," she said, "I'm afraid we've received additional information regarding your conduct." She slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed screenshots of my bank transactions, payments to a downtown hotel, restaurant bills, lingerie stores. Every one of them linked to dates I had told Paul the first was on night shifts. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my hand shaking. She didn't answer. "An anonymous submission," she said. Anonymous. But I knew. Paul. He had gone to the hospital. He'd given them evidence. He wanted me to pay not just emotionally, but professionally. I was placed on indefinite leave pending review for ethical violations. I walked out of that office numb. My whole identity was built around my job. I'd been a nurse for 15 years. I'd held dying hands, calmed crying children, worked holidays and double shifts. And now, in one moment, it was gone. When I reached the parking lot, William was already there. His face was pale, eyes red. "They got me too," he said. "We're both under administrative review." He tried to touch my arm, but I pulled away. I didn't want comfort from the man who'd just lost me my career. He told me Lisa had filed for divorce officially. She'd also gone to court demanding full custody, claiming his affair proved he was morally unfit. The hospital scandal gave her all the proof she needed. He looked broken, but I couldn't even find pity. We'd both done this to ourselves. That night, I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Paul had left behind only the furniture and the memories. Every photograph where we were together, he had covered his own face with a white sticker. It was cruelly symbolic. He'd erased himself completely, but left just enough to remind me what I'd lost. A few days later, a formal envelope arrived. It wasn't from him, it was from the hospital's legal department. They had decided to reassign me temporarily to another facility while the board reviewed my case. It was a polite way of saying they didn't trust me anymore. The letter felt heavier than it should have. I didn't tell anyone. My friends from work stopped messaging me once the rumor spread. People at the hospital talk, and nothing travels faster than a scandal about infidelity. Some of the nurses I'd trained years ago couldn't even look me in the eye when I passed them in the hallway. At night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Paul, where he was, what he was doing if he hated me that much. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how methodical he'd been. He hadn't just wanted to leave me. He wanted me to feel what I had made him feel, small, humiliated, powerless. And it was working. About a month after he left, I decided to call his old friend, Mark. He was a private investigator, someone Paul used to mention sometimes. I don't know why I called him. Maybe I just wanted to know if Paul was okay. Maybe I was hoping he'd passed along some message through Mark. When I asked if he'd heard from Paul, there was a long silence. Then Mark said quietly, "Jane, you need to let him go. He asked me to make sure you didn't try to find him." I swallowed hard. "Did he tell you to say that?" "He doesn't want contact. He said everything he needed to say in that video." I tried to steady my voice. "Can you at least tell me where he is?" "No, Jane," Mark said. He made it clear he wanted to start over somewhere new. And honestly, after what happened, maybe that's the best thing for both of you. That was the moment I realized Paul wasn't just punishing me. He'd deleted me. Weeks passed. I tried focusing on work, but the stares, the whispers, the judgment followed me everywhere. Even some patients had heard about it. One woman refused to let me take her vitals because she didn't want a homewrecker touching her. I wanted to disappear. William, meanwhile, was losing everything too. His wife got full custody, and the court order limited his visitation to every other weekend. The hospital demoted him. We barely talked anymore. Every time he called, I felt sick. I couldn't look at him without seeing all the wreckage of what we'd done. One night, he came over unannounced. He looked desperate. "Jane, we could start over," he said. "You and me. Away from all this." I stared at him for a long time. "William," I said quietly, "we destroyed 2 families. Starting over isn't something people like us get to do." He started crying. I didn't. I was too empty for tears. Eventually, he stopped calling. Months went by. Paul had vanished from my life completely. No calls, no emails, not even mutual friends. One day, I went to our bank just to close the joint account officially. I thought I'd find nothing but a zero balance, but when the teller printed the last 6 months of statements, I froze. There were charges I hadn't noticed before: hotel stays, dinner bills, payments to a private investigator service. He had planned everything. The tracking, the evidence, even the exposure at the hospital. He'd turned my affair into a blueprint for my downfall. And the most painful part? He'd never raised his voice once. It was around that time that William's wife, Lisa, reached out to me. It was the last thing I expected. She didn't yell or curse. She just asked to meet in a coffee shop. I went, mostly out of guilt. When I saw her, she looked calm, too calm. I wanted to see you face to face, she said. Not to fight. I just needed to understand what makes a woman risk everything like that. I had no answer. I just stared at my coffee, whispering, I don't even know anymore. She sighed and said, You know, when my husband confessed, he said he felt needed for the first time in years. That's what you gave him, attention. But what did it give you? I couldn't speak. She shook her head, stood up, and left. I sat there for almost an hour, replaying her question. What did it give me? A few stolen moments that cost me everything real I'd ever had. By the time winter came, I was barely surviving. I worked part-time at a smaller clinic while my case stayed under review. The truth was, they weren't planning to fire me outright. They just wanted me to quit quietly. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was Paul. It never was. Then one afternoon I got an email from the hospital board. They'd officially concluded the investigation. Their decision was disciplinary action and reassignment. In other words, I could keep my license, but I'd never work at the same level again. That night, I packed the last of Paul's things into a box. Old shirts, his favorite coffee mug, a tie I'd bought him years ago. I planned to donate it all. But when I opened the drawer, I found something that stopped me cold, an old envelope with my name on it. It was sealed, dated almost a month before he left. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short handwritten note. Jane, if you ever find this, I want you to know something. I didn't want revenge. I wanted honesty. You could have told me you were unhappy. You could have told me about the pain, the loneliness. I would have tried. But you chose someone else instead. You made me question everything I ever was as a husband. I'll live, but I won't forget. Paul. I read that letter over and over, trying to understand which part hurt more, the betrayal he felt, or the quiet dignity he'd left with. I realized something then. Paul hadn't destroyed me. I had destroyed myself. He'd only handed me the mirror I'd been avoiding. For months, I carried that letter everywhere. I couldn't explain why. It felt like the last piece of him I had left. William eventually moved away to another state. I heard from a former coworker that he'd been reassigned to a rural hospital. Lisa remarried within a year. They said her new husband treated the kids like his own. And me? I lived with my choices, in an empty apartment, staring at the ceiling most nights, wondering what Paul was doing, who he was with, if he'd found peace. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Because 2 years later, just when I'd learned to live with my regrets, I got a call that changed everything. It was from Mark. He sounded uneasy. Jane, I know it's been a long time, but you need to know something. My chest tightened. What is it? It's about Paul, he said. Someone reached out looking for him. Who? He hesitated. A man named William. My breath caught. After everything, I thought I'd never hear that name again. What does he want? Mark sighed. He says he has something important to tell Paul. Something about you. My stomach dropped. I thought my story with Paul had ended years ago. But now I realized the truth. Our story wasn't over yet. 2 years had passed since Paul left. 2 years since my world had collapsed and rebuilt itself into something quieter, emptier, but strangely clearer. I'd moved to California for a fresh start, working part-time at a small community clinic. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a reason to wake up every morning. I had accepted the loneliness. Some days it felt like punishment, other days like peace. I'd stopped expecting closure, stopped waiting for any kind of redemption. Then one evening my phone rang. "Jane," a familiar voice said, "It's Mark." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I hadn't heard that name in years. The man Paul once called his friend, the investigator who'd known everything about our downfall. "Mark," I said. "Why are you calling me?" He hesitated. "I wouldn't have, but something's come up. You need to know about Paul." My heart skipped. "What happened to him? Is he okay?" "He's fine," Mark said quickly. "He's in Detroit. He's doing well, new job, new life. But that's not why I called. Someone's looking for him." "Who?" He paused, like he was debating whether to tell me. "A man named William." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. "William? As in my William?" "Yes." "He contacted me through a mutual friend. Said he needed to reach Paul urgently. Something about having information Paul deserved to know." I felt my chest tighten. Did he say what it was about? No. But he sounded desperate. I hung up, my mind spinning. What could William possibly have to say to Paul after all this time? What information could matter now? For 3 days, I tried to ignore it. But guilt has a way of clawing back through the cracks, no matter how deep you bury it. I couldn't stop wondering. What if Paul misunderstood something? What if there was a truth he never knew, something that might ease even a fraction of the pain I'd caused? Late one night, I gave in. I texted William for the first time in over a year. He replied instantly. "Jane, I've been trying to reach you." I asked him to meet me at a quiet diner off the highway, a place where no one knew us. When I saw him walk in, I barely recognized him. The confident man I once loved looked worn, older, almost haunted. His hair had turned gray at the edges, and his eyes were sunken like he hadn't slept properly in months. "Jane," he said softly, sitting across from me. "You look different." "So do you," I replied. "Mark told me you've been trying to find Paul." He nodded. "I met him." The words made my stomach twist. "You what?" "I met him last week." He agreed to talk. I told him everything. My throat went dry. "Everything what?" William rubbed his hands together nervously. "About why you cheated. About your condition. About the things you never told him." I froze. He continued. "Jane, he didn't know about the endometriosis. He thought you were on birth control. He thought you just didn't want kids." My eyes filled before I could stop them. "He didn't even ask," I whispered. "He never wanted to talk about it. Every time I tried, he shut down." "I know," William said gently. "But he deserved to know. You both did." I could imagine that meeting. Paul sitting across from William, cold and distant, hearing the truth for the first time. The idea made me nauseous. "What did he say?" I asked quietly. William sighed. "At first, he didn't believe me. But when I told him how long you'd been trying, how much pain you were in, I think it broke something in him. He didn't forgive you, Jane. But I think he finally understood." I stared at the table. The diner smelled like coffee and rain, but all I could feel was the old ache in my chest, the one I thought I'd buried years ago. "Why now, William?" I asked. "Why tell him after all this time?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I'm tired of carrying this guilt. I lost my kids, my wife, my career. I thought maybe if he knew the full story, it would mean something. For both of you." There was a long silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel angry at him. Just sad. He looked up again, his voice soft. "He's moved on, Jane. He's remarried. Her name's Rebecca. They have a little girl now." He said her name's Sarah. Something inside me cracked. I smiled weakly, tears rolling down. "Good. He deserves that." William nodded. "He does." We sat there for a while, two ghosts sharing the same guilt. Before he left, he said quietly, "He's not your enemy anymore, Jane. Maybe it's time to stop being yours." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Paul, about that girl named Sarah, about how he must have looked holding his daughter for the first time. Maybe he finally got the life we both once wanted. Maybe that was the justice in all this. A week later, I did something I hadn't planned to ever do again. I wrote him a letter. It wasn't long, just 2 pages, handwritten, no excuses, no apologies he hadn't already heard. I told him that I was sorry not for getting caught, but for not being honest when I still had the chance. I told him I understood his silence, that his revenge was fair, maybe even merciful compared to what I'd done. And I told him that I had heard about Sarah and that I was glad he finally had his family. I ended it with a single line. I hope, someday, you can think of me without anger. I didn't expect him to reply. He didn't. But writing that letter felt like taking off a heavy coat I'd been wearing for years. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt light. Not happy, just free. Months passed. Life moved quietly. I started volunteering at a local orphanage on weekends. The first time I held a little boy who'd lost his parents, something inside me shifted. It wasn't motherhood, but it was something close. Maybe that was the universe's strange way of giving me a second chance to love selflessly, without expectation. One afternoon, as I was closing the clinic, I received a small envelope in the mail. There was no return address, just my name written in Paul's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there was no letter, only a photo. It was a picture of a baby girl with curly brown hair, sitting in someone's lap. I didn't need to see the rest of the photo to know whose lap it was. On the back, he'd written 5 words. She has your smile. Thank you. I cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not because it meant reconciliation. It didn't. It meant closure. It meant forgiveness, in the quietest, kindest way possible. That night, I took out the old envelope, the one Paul had left before he disappeared, and placed it beside this new one. 2 pieces of our story, years apart. One filled with pain, the other with peace. I realized something as I stared at them under the soft glow of my lamp. Our marriage hadn't failed because of the affair. The affair was just the symptom. What killed us was silence, the kind that grows between 2 people who stop talking, stop asking, stop caring enough to understand each other. I thought love died when Paul walked away, but I was wrong. It just changed form. It became a quiet gratitude for the years we did share, for the lessons learned the hardest way possible. Sometimes, when I see couples at the clinic, I catch glimpses of my old self, the woman who thought love could survive without communication, who mistook attention for affection. I always tell them the same thing now. Talk before it's too late. Say what hurts before it becomes betrayal. It's strange. After everything I did, I still believe in love. Not the kind that burns bright and fast, but the kind that stays, that grows through truth and forgiveness. People often ask me if I ever heard from William again. The answer is no. He moved away, probably trying to rebuild whatever life he could. We were 2 broken people who met at the wrong time and mistook shared pain for love. Paul, on the other hand, never contacted me again after that photo. He didn't need to. That one gesture said everything words never could. Years later, when I finally adopted a little girl, I named her Hope. Because that's what was left after everything else was gone. Hope that people can learn, can change, can find peace after destroying everything once. And every time I look at her, I remember the lesson that cost me everything. Love can survive betrayal, but only if honesty comes first. If silence builds walls, truth is the only thing that can tear them down. I lost my husband, my career, and my reputation. But I found something far greater, clarity. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not getting a happy ending, but learning to live without needing one. Because in the end, we all become stories. And this was mine.